Hi, and welcome to the introductory video for Unit 5 of EDAD 6845, School Community Relations. In Unit 5, we'll be looking specifically at community partnerships. This really sort of wraps up our 3-week unit here on looking at schools and the diverse communities they serve somewhat abstractly, and thinking about how those apply to our own school. Last week we looked at schools and parents as one of the primary stakeholders of our schools. And this week we're zooming out a little bit to look specifically at community partnerships. And here I mean by community partnerships specifically organization to organization relationships that you'll have with external entities or external individuals who are in certain political bodies or groups of authority that your school has to work with in collaboration. And so there's no online dialogue for Unit 5, but the trade-off there is that you're ramping up your project work here. We actually have 2 things you're going to want to be doing during Unit 5. Number 1 is prepping and beginning to schedule your school community leader interviews. The second is to complete your community resource map. And those have different deadlines and different emphases, so I sort of want to deal with those separately. First is the community leader interviews. You are to select 5 to 7 individuals who, by virtue of their social contacts or their position in the community that you serve, have some sort of following. This doesn't mean this is a business owner, oh that could be. It could be somebody who's lived in the neighborhood a long time and just happens to know everybody. It could be somebody who comes from a big family. I recommend business owners in the very close proximity to the school who interact with your students. I recommend clergy, elected officials who serve in areas close enough to your school where they would know about your school and your strengths and challenges. I don't encourage people to use people who have a formal relationship with a school, as in a board relationship governing your district or your school. I think they're within the educational realm, and so I don't define them quite the same way as a community partner as I would clergy, business, social services, elected officials, and that sort of thing. I'd emphasize that those non-school people more. There's a couple reasons I'm having you schedule these interviews. Number 1, it gives you a sense of the varied perspectives folks are going to have on your school. As educators, most of our talk about a school deals with parents who are intimately connected and staff who are intimately connected with the school. And so this allows you to get a broader sense of how your school is perceived in the external community, which ultimately, if you're going to be responsible for improving that school, you need to have a good sense of the political pulse of your community and be able to read that to make the correct moves when you're representing the school out in the community. Number 2, I just want you to have face time with these people. These people have a following for a reason. They're opinion influencers in your community, and I want them to know who you are. And so this is your time to call them up, send them an email, get in touch with them, and spend 20 or 30 minutes with them. The interviews can be done by telephone. Some of these are going to be busy people who may not have time to have you at their office or meet you at school. I like, particularly when you're meeting somebody for the first time, I think the interviews go a lot better if they're in person. So I would encourage everybody to schedule them in person first and only use phone as a backup. I don't want anybody to use electronic emailed interviews for this. I feel like that you get scripted answers through that way and a little bit less honesty, and you're not getting any face time with them at all, obviously. So phone or in person are really the only viable data collection techniques for the interviews. I want you to begin thinking about that this week. It's not going to be submitted until the end of the semester when you submit your final plan. But you're going to have these 5 to 7 community leaders, and you're going to look at the rubric at the end of your syllabus to look at the types of examples of people, and you can see the overview of this unit has a sampling of the types of people that might be there. When you turn this in, you're going to, at the end of the semester, you're going to submit a list of interview questions. That's probably just a page. You're going to submit about a 1-page summary of each individual interview, and then about 2 pages of your concluding thoughts across the interviews, sort of tying together and emphasizing whatever new insights you got from speaking to those community leaders. And that'll be due, as I said, at the end of the course when you submit your final project. That'll be one of the big data pieces that you'll use to make recommendations. And you ought to be noticing this pattern here where every time you're out in the world doing a data collection assignment, the parent surveys we dealt with recently, these are community leader interviews, you're doing this work with an eye towards how can I take what I learned in that data collection experience and build that into the plan. Where does what I'm hearing from the community leaders overlap with what the parents are saying or what my analysis of the current plan did? And so the things that should make it into your final plan are the things that you're seeing pop up in more than one place. Those are the things where you're making a pretty reasonable bet on this is something that A is needed and B is going to be successful because people are calling for it. So as you move through all these data collection pieces moving forward and towards the end of the course, pay particular attention to the conclusion of each of those, where you're sort of connecting back to prior data you've collected from this course and refining what your final recommendations are going to be. If you do a good job doing that, your final plan is half written before you actually have to sit down and even do it. Alright, so that's the first topic for this week, community leader interviews. The second topic is your community resource map. This is going to look very similar to your current plan analysis, where I give you a worksheet. It's located in Moodle, and you can see it there. And you're going to be establishing a number of partnerships. The difference between the current plan analysis and the community resource map is that you're going to use both current real partnerships and potential partnerships. So you're going to include some things here that don't exactly exist yet, but you think have a good chance to benefit the school. For both real and potential partnerships, you're going to categorize them according to 3 typologies. That should sound familiar. This is the same process you use. The typologies are different here a little bit. One is from my article on low-risk feedback and from 2010, and that looks at community relationships on a 3-part typology sort of arranged according to their intensity. I conducted this study that informed this article right after Katrina, and so it should come as no surprise that a lot of the principals I spoke with had a lot of charitable relationships. They were replacing library books and furniture and everything in the school. So charitable relationships where an external entity is giving the school something is the first level. In my typology, the second level is technical support relationships, and those are relationships where there's educational expertise that the school needs, but it doesn't have itself. It needs to borrow from the outside. So perhaps someone coming in and doing special ed evals, someone coming in and supporting your teachers in their literacy practices or behavior management. So a lot of times these are contractual relationships where the school will bring in somebody who has expertise in something that they want to get better at. That's sort of the essence of a technical support relationship. But important there is that the school is paying for this fee, and at any point if they need to cancel that contract or they're not happy with the relationship, they can just cancel that. The money stops flowing and the relationship ends. That makes it somewhat different than the third level, which are feedback relationships, which are relationships with external entities that definitely need to have some educational capacity. But they entered into it on somewhat more of a equal footing in terms of power. The 2 groups have come together and committed to critiquing each other's performance. They have made a more long-term commitment that's going to extend beyond any single contract. And they need to trust that each other has some understanding of what the organization does and is willing to do and able to do, so that they can persist that relationship over time. I argue that not enough schools have these higher level feedback relationships, and we probably shouldn't have very many because they're very resource intensive and they take a lot to maintain. However, if we're going to get the most we can from our external relationships, to me it seems that schools ought to be trying to locate or establish one feedback relationship, which is a strong, trusting relationship with an external entity that has some educational capacity that can be a thought partner and a strategist while the school is planning improvement activities. The other typologies you're going to analyze your community relationships with are the Mavis and Sanders partnership purposes that we already used for our current plan analysis, and also the types of relationships from Mavis Sanders. So you're going to look in there, and there's 2 columns that have Sanders' name attached to them, and you'll complete that for each one. And by the end of this unit, you're going to submit just a summary of those relationships. No narrative, just the table. And I'll have that, and then that ought to play into your final analysis as it lines up with other data points that you're collecting. So one example that I gave in the overview for this week is if there's a church around the corner from your school that organizes volunteers that run after-school choir practices, under the organization type from Sanders, that's a faith-based organization, so the partner is a faith-based organization. The purpose here is student support because they're supporting students in becoming a better choir and singing. And in terms of my typology, this would be a technical support relationship most likely because they have some skill capacity that the school doesn't necessarily have. And they can do that. Whether you have a choir director who can't stay after school or you don't even have one at all, they're providing something that your school currently doesn't have. So that's a technical support relationship. In this case, a non-monetary one, most likely if it was a church. So I look forward to receiving the community resource map template completed from each of you via email at the end of the unit. And I won't actually see the result of your community leader interviews until the end of the semester, but you are to start setting those up, get your research questions pulled together. You see one of the assigned readings this week is from Kowalski, where he looks at interview questions. There's also a sample community leader interview write-up located on Moodle, so I invite you to take a look at that for good suggestions for types of people, things to ask, and then how that final write-up ought to look. I look forward to seeing you online, and looking ahead, we'll be looking at our media relations and marketing, and we'll be looking at crisis planning in the next 2 online dialogue units. There aren't new data collection activities for those weeks, and so it's expected that you're continuing on with your parent surveys, your community leader interviews, and sort of pulling those things together because that's obviously time-intensive activities. And so we'll be dialoguing over the next 2 weeks, but we won't be introducing any new parts of the final project. It's anticipated that you're making progress on those as we go. Email me if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing your work.